We are recording, and the governor has declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the nature of this declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the Central Virginia Regional Housing Partnership Executive Committee to assemble in a single location. This meeting will be held utilizing electronic virtual communication with the Zoom software application and in accordance with virtual meeting procedures and policies as outlined in item 4.0-01 of the Virginia State Budget HB 29 as effective April 24th, 2020. The meeting will be recorded and made available to the public at www.tjpdc.org.
Thank you very much, Lucinda. So we'll go backwards a little bit since we now officially read in and are recording. Is there any comments from the public? All right, hearing none, I'm going to close that portion of the agenda. The next item up is the consent agenda, which would be the minutes from the April 28th meeting and the financial update. Any thoughts or comments or any edits or changes on that? And hearing none, if there isn't any, I'll accept the motion. Oh, I got a finger up.
Change.
Muted.
Yep, there was a change under the updates. Margaret was just looking for it. Margaret, are you here? She was coming.
Yep,
Yes, she's here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I made a change to the minutes. Is that what you're asking about? Right. So you had me as being part of the Monticello area community action, and it's Nelson County Community Development Foundation. It was just a correction of my organization's name.
Yeah.
Thanks for catching that correction, Margaret.
Any other changes or edits? How about any comments on the financial update? All righty, hearing none, I'd love to entertain an emotion, please.
Move to accept the minutes and
Thank
the
you.
financials.
Thank you, Greg. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Colette. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All righty, thank you, folks. All righty, we're going to skip over the election of officers since that is Ned's going to tackle that. Maybe because he isn't here, we'll just order to appoint him chairman. What do you think, guys? That'll work out. So you'll show up late for one of my meetings. So the next subject up is a draft regional housing plan. It looks like Anthony and Nick are on the agenda. So folks, it's in your ballpark.
Great, thank you, Keith. And I don't know if it would be helpful to have a screen share of this, or if everyone just can bring up the portion in their packet. People are nodding for a screen share. I'm not sure. Should I just do that?
No, if you have it up, you're welcome to share. If not, I'm happy to bring it up for you. Would you like me to go to the regional page?
Sure.
Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. That'll be great. Thank you.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the portion that I'm gonna just cover and wanted to go over with you all. Is the regional portion. Talk a little bit about how we got to this, where we're at with it, and then talk a little bit about next steps for it. Awesome.
I see my screen.
Yes, we can.
And does it say background in process? I want to make sure not to go too far in like I did last time. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So as you know, the strategies committee has been working on the locality plans for the past, years, maybe. And we're at an important part of that process where those have been completed. And what we have in front of you today is the regional portion, which was always a part of the intent of this project, was to create the local plans or the proposals for the plans, as well as a regional chapter as well. And we had a lot of really fruitful discussion in the strategies committee about how this should be laid out. because the locality plans are much more simple in terms of their intent and then their audience and how they can be, put into practice. The regional one was a little bit more tricky because there were a lot of different ideas about how to approach this regionally. And so this was definitely, from members of the committee, we had some good back and forth about the proper intent to this. And what we landed on was we felt it was really important to have the regional chapter be dedicated to something that is uniquely regional and not to reiterate portions or action steps that could be found in the individual local plans. And again, as a reminder, the individual local plans had recommendations for what each locality could pursue to further affordable housing in that region. And we wanted something similar for the regional chapter, but we did not want to just reiterate the same steps. We wanted something uniquely regional. And so what we came to was basically this section, which starts with kind of the background and process, which is listed here. And if you want to scroll down a little bit, Christine, to the guiding principles portion, we wanted to really kind of start with that portion in particular, which comes from work that the RHP has done previously, which kind of guided the whole process up to this point. What we wanted to achieve through this coordination, engagement with the community, equity, anti-displacement, mobility, connectivity, and accessibility were the guiding principles for each local chapter, and also the guiding principles for the region. And so we felt it was important to place that there as important to incorporate in any regional approach. And then the regional goals ended up being, if you want to scroll down really briefly to that quickly, basically a distillation of the common themes or the common types of action steps that could be found in each locality's own individual recommended steps to achieve affordable housing. And we felt that, and basically all those different steps fell under these three areas to focus on, which was something related to policy, programming in terms of, implementation, so services or programs to implement to further affordable housing, and then capital, leveraging capital, whether that's through local budgets or other grant sources or federal sources leveraging. And so those are basically the three areas, the three themes that were consistent across each local chapter. And we felt that was important to highlight here in the regional chapter as regional goals to stay consistent with across the board, that as a region, if these things can be, if these three areas can be achieved, essentially, then we would have be heading in the right direction and be achieving the intent of these strategic housing chapters. The part of the challenge with this process was identifying who owns these goals and who owns measuring our success towards them. You'll notice that we don't have specific metrics in these goals, and that was something that came up definitely in our discussion in the evaluation in the strategies committee. And what we came to was that without having an entity identified who's clearly responsible for measuring those metrics, it didn't make a lot of sense at this juncture to spend time to develop those. We felt that really this exercise, going through this, was important for us to come to the realization that we need to, as an RHP, go through a strategic planning process to identify truly is that the RHP's charge? Is that a different entity's charge to measure metrics? And also, how do we have the staffing and capacity to do something like that? And so I just want to name that, because clearly that's something that the evaluation or the strategies committee discussed at length, was the importance of having metrics if you're going to have goals. And yet we also, that brought up the question of, well, who's going to be responsible for that? And that isn't clear yet. And so we just want to be upfront with you about that. There is in these goals, the intent to actually do that, to highlight, hey, we need to create these metrics for our region, and we need to identify and go through a process to identify who is the responsible entity to own the regional approach. The localities is covered, that's very clear, but the regional approach is a question. I think the RHP is very well suited to do that, but we need to figure out how to set ourselves up to be able to follow through properly. So anyways, that's how we came to these regional goals as a distillation of the different themes that each of these local chapters incorporated in terms of the next steps and their action plans. And so that kind of lays out both where we're at with the regional chapter, and also where I think going through this process has led us to really kind of need those next steps through, I think, a larger strategic planning process, because it brought up questions that really need to be answered for us to really fully bring this to the next level. So I wanted to, give that brief overview of what this is, how we got here, and also what it means for next steps, and also offer opportunities for questions from you, comments about this. As a quick next steps, after reviewing it with you all in the executive committee, it's going to go to the full RHP in June for a similar review process, and then to the TJPDC for official approval. So that's kind of the next steps with this. So,
Thank you, Anthony.
yes. How did I do, Christine or Nick, on that?
You did great. I think you covered, kind of the process and how we came about. Obviously, it's certainly been an iterative process, but I think the regional chapter has been probably one of the more challenging ones to write, just because to me, it seems easier to kind of go through the data at the local level and be able to come up with more targeted strategies. But as we're looking at the regional level, it's a little bit more nuanced and complex, but I think we're moving in the right direction, and happy to hear any sort of feedback from you all.
So that being said, any feedback or questions for Anthony, Nick, or staff? Please jump in when you're ready. Oh,
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm saying okay. Anybody want to chime in?
Yeah, Greg wants to.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thanks, Greg.
You had mentioned approval from the planning district. Is it necessary, useful, beneficial, bad idea to get each of the regions to, each of the jurisdictions to also bless it? Since we're talking about their goals.
Right. That makes sense to me. I'm not as, I guess, I don't know. I don't have as much institutional knowledge of TJPDC to know if that's an appropriate thing to ask. What do you all think about that idea? Makes sense to me to think about.
Keith, does the planning district approval basically give a regional approval, since the board is, so there's no need to
maybe that is the same.
Trying to get individuals.
Yeah.
So the way I would look at it is exactly that, Greg. The essence of the commission is we represent all 6 jurisdictions. So there's representation on that. So by the fact of the commission approving it, I would not personally be in favor of going back to the jurisdictions individually. I think that'll just drag this process a little too far down the road. They've appointed people to be on that to represent their jurisdictions.
Yeah, I was hoping that would be the answer.
That's the answer.
It seems to make sense. And has each jurisdiction, Nick, given you feedback on the various sections? A lot of them were authored in part by folks from the various jurisdictions.
Yeah, there was definitely Nick could probably talk more to it, but there was definitely a lot of, a process of sharing the drafts, the local chapters, and getting that feedback and incorporating it in.
Correct. So prior to kind of that templated draft that I think everyone's had a chance to look at and, over time, We did have initial stakeholder feedback from each locality prior to development of those specific strategies for each one. We have, I think Christine has sent or is about to send, not to put you on the spot, Christine, the full draft minus the regional component to each locality. So that way they can review not only theirs, but also see strategies for the other localities within the PDC region. And then I guess once we hear any sort of specific feedback from them, we'll adjust as needed.
Christine, you want to weigh in on where we are in that process? My concern is to put this out, making all these recommendations on behalf of 6 jurisdictions and getting some blowback because it's a highly participatory region.
Christine,
Yeah.
you were kind of muted before. I don't know if something's going on, but I couldn't hear you in case you were trying to talk. Cannot hear you. Greg, I think it's a good question, and maybe Christine can chime in on it. But I think that what the unique part of this regional chapter is like, again, the TJ, I mean, essentially this is for the TJPDC. Ultimately, it's going to go through the RHP for approval, but the TJPDC is, it's going to be presented to TJPDC.
Yeah, Greg, that's going to land on our shoulders at the commission, and it'll be our responsibility to communicate with our jurisdictions. So I appreciate the concern, but I think, if we get a little bit more of the jurisdictions involved in it, as I said earlier, I think it's just going to drag out a little bit. For a ton of work has been done on it. It's time to adopt it. And
You guys hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, sorry about that. I had it must have been going to the Bluetooth speakers. I didn't
So,
recognize.
Madam Executive Director, am I on the right track here with the commission?
Yes, I was just going to share that I was waiting for this executive committee to kind of give it their nod that this is in the right direction. And I actually already have an email drafted to all of the localities, sending it to both their planning departments and their chief executive officer and staff for them to also put eyes on it. But Greg, to your point, we have been working with not all, but several of the local governments directly, and have had, other than Charlottesville and Albemarle, 2 of the rural counties reach out to us to stay involved in the process, and even to ask me to come present to their board once this becomes a completed document. And so they are, I think some of them are looking forward to this coming their way, and I'll be sending it right after this meeting for their feedback as well.
But that's not going to hold the process up, correct?
Nope, that's just to put it in front of them and ask them for feedback.
Got it. Okay, great. Any other questions on this before we move backwards on the agenda, since Ned has joined us? Gesundheit, call it. All righty. Going once, going twice. Great. Okay. So Ned, thanks for joining us. We skipped over your elections of officers. Actually, I think we appointed you chairman, by the way. Gesundheit again, Colette. So that's what you get for showing up late. But you are on the agenda, sir.
Well, if everyone recalls or remembers, our bylaws have it set up for officers. Well, obviously we're being elected, but we had term limited. In our great wisdom of working through the bylaws, we said we were going to put 2-year, I think no more than 2 years for any particular individual in a position. And then of course, as we continued with Keith and myself in the current positions moving forward, the rationale being that to get this body up and running, good idea to keep the consistency going. So, this body has to decide, do we want to continue with that? The bylaws allow us to continue. Keith is certainly willing to continue on as chair if we wish him to do so, but we would have to then take a vote and make that, Christine will have to tell me the exact path we have to do, but it is in our bylaws that we can go outside of that term limit if we so choose. It just takes an action of the full, I think it's the full voting partnership. Is that right?
Yeah.
If memory serves. And just bringing that forward, I know that I'll use my own county as an example. Part of the reason it's a little unusual for somebody to remain chair for a 3rd year, at least in Albemarle County, if it's not a disputed type of situation, which it's not been. But part of the reason this year that some of the rationale that, that I continue as chair with some of the consistency coming out of COVID and the virtual meetings and things like that. And part of me suggests that that is a good idea for us, just as we're still getting this body going. But I'm introducing it as a possibility to this body, that since Keith is willing to continue to serve, I'd like to know everybody else's thoughts to see if that's a possibility, so we can keep the leadership intact. And then if that's the case, then we have to get ready to take that particular action on the bylaws. If that's not the sentiment, then we have to have that conversation and figure out who the new leadership is going to be. So I throw that out there as a discussion point. Happy, Keith, myself, Christine, we can answer any questions if need be about the bylaws or what have you. The original conversation as somebody that worked on the bylaws, just to add this out there, is that obviously you don't want somebody to be in the same position for 10, 15, you can get a certain institutionalization going on. So, you don't want somebody in there for 6 or 8 or 10. I mean, those were the examples we were doing. I think we're in a little bit of a unique situation going into maybe a third year with the same piece, but that was the thought behind doing the term limits, so that we but tried to not keep just the same individuals always in the same positions.
And I can add to that, Mrs. Smith will not allow me to do it more than one more year, so that you know.
So that was my question, Ned. Are we talking about just another year for each of the positions as opposed to another term, which would be 2 years?
Yeah, I wouldn't, and I want to keep the term limit. I'm not asking, I wouldn't say we change the bylaws and change the term limit or anything like that. But in our individual act as a board, in our bylaws, we would say, let's go ahead and continue for the following year. And then we get into the fall, when the next time this comes around next July, I guess it would be, that we, probably in May would need to put, this body can serve as the committee to put a slate forward to go to the committee with who the officers are, et cetera. This committee may continue to change by next year. But yeah, I think it's just an additional year, and we're not changing the bylaws. We're just using the bylaws to take this particular action.
Well, and the bylaws right now, the terms are 1 year, and you can serve up to 2 consecutive terms. So you can serve up to 2 total. So this would be asking for a 1-year extension or a 1-year exception to what's in the bylaws without having to revise them so that this can continue to occur in the future.
No, I forgot that it was a one-year term. Yeah.
Thanks, Ned. And I think that's a good plan. I think, Keith, you have my vote of confidence, and I think it's also good for us, for the health of the organization, to try to put in place some opportunities to bring in folks who can and would be, beneficial for RHP to move into that role. So I think it's important for us to think about how we do that. And one of the things I think about is, Christine can remind me, but I think in our bylaws that our seats are kind of maybe a bit too set in stone. And so I'm wondering if there's an opportunity maybe for us, for the executive committee, to have some new life, to also think about moving into that chair position. So I just wanted to put that forward.
Thank you, Anthony. That was kind of one of the things, if you so choose for me to stay on for another year. I think, since I think COVID is kind of in the rearview mirror, we have to start taking a look a little bit at organizational. We should be rotating different people from like somebody else from the commission other than me should be on the spot. Maybe somebody from different organizations, to try to get a little bit of more diversity as far as thought goes. Or diversity across the board on this body, to get some new ideas and moving forward. But I can assure you, this took a little convincing and a trip to the Caribbean to allow Mrs. Smith to allow me to do this for one more year. So my limit is 1 more year, folks, and then somebody else would have to fill in the slot.
And I would love to add that I think if we are successful with the Virginia Housing Grant to be able to do a strategic planning process, that looking at the membership of the partnership would be an aspect of that planning process.
Yeah, somebody smarter than me has to pick this up and move it forward. I've done as much damage as I could.
Yeah, I
my-
think there's still some foundational things that the organization needs to wrestle with. And I think that it would be good to have, Keith and Ned both continue for, to get us through that and then give us, as Anthony said, ample time to look at membership and the next leadership transition. So I agree with the proposal.
And I think when we go to the full partnership, the comments about thinking who will be the future, who has interest, cycling through the executive committee, that sort of thing. To me, it's getting this final budget piece out and then the next the strategic priority planning, the full on scope. I think those last two items would complete that foundational work. So we can give people a specific kind of time frame. So it's not like, oh, well, this is open-ended and I could have the same conversation next year.
Well, we'll put some performance metrics to it, right? So we can move forward.
I think, Greg, you had a comment? Sorry, Keith.
I was about to basically say exactly what you just said, that, we're very close to getting the housing plan out. And then I think, really need to come up with a strategic plan of what next. What are we going to do as an organization? I think part of that should be a serious discussion of the makeup of the board, and equally important, or maybe more so, the executive board. I, for one, would be more than happy to rotate off to let fresh people come on. And I think that if we do get to do a strategic planning session, it should be at the full board level, obviously. And that would be a time to define what, now that we've got the plan in place, what is the mission of this group, and how do we achieve it going forward, and how do we reinforce or reorganize the board makeup, or the executive board makeup, in order to make all of that happen. So I'm in full support of carrying on one more year.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I think we as a team did a really great job getting a lot of boxes checked during COVID, probably better than most organizations. Maybe some of the volunteers when I've been part of on that end of it, but it's now time for us to grow up, and a change of an executive committee and board structure is always a good step forward. So is there any, Christine, is there any formal action required, or how does your crystal ball say on that?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking through that, anticipating that question coming, that technically this is a revision of the bylaws. So I want to do a little bit more research, but I'm thinking that what we're going to have to do is put it before the full partnership as a revision in the bylaws that states an addition, under extenuating circumstances, an additional year can be approved with, a vote of the full partnership. So I think it is something that we're going to have to include formal language within the bylaws. I don't think we can just bypass and say we want to extend a year without making it a part of the bylaws.
So in order to trigger that, a motion is probably going to come from this body to work itself up. Okay, got it. Anybody want to take a stab at that? Ned, do you want to take a stab at the language on that, or staff, or somebody want to?
Christine, let me try this on. I move that we approve an additional term, 1-year term, for Keith Smith as chair and myself as vice chair, as allowed per our bylaws, and then update the bylaws accordingly to satisfy this unique change. That last part might not be needed.
Well, I think it gets us close enough. Anybody want to add some language to that, or alter it, or actually make a second?
Well, let me just ask, you talked about the executive roles within the executive board. Should it include the executive board, the group of us, or do we want to look at changes during this year of the executive board makeup?
I think because this is a bylaws change, we keep it clean just for the chair, vice chair change. And then after this motion, I was going to make a point that I think gets to what you're talking about, Greg, that this body maybe takes on.
Yeah, and to add to that, Ned, even to clean it up a little bit more, I think this might need to move into 2 different actions. The first one being to revise the bylaws, and the second one that this executive committee elects you to serve in that additional year position. I think
Yeah,
we
that's
need to-
great. That makes sense.
which means, Ned, you would need to remove your motion, and then we would have to restate those in two separate parts.
Or do
If
we,
his motion isn't ever seconded, then
Oh, it wasn't.
that's,
Okay.
yeah, then it just
That
can go away. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And then my point, because I was just reading the bylaws, is if you guys just switch roles, I don't think we'd have to change. You could stay chair and vice chair.
I tried to talk Ned into that. It didn't work.
Ah,
Trust me.
Okay, all right. Well, that would mean we
Oh,
wouldn't have
I
to
mean-
change the bylaws. And you would basically be in the same positions.
Frankly, to be the chair of my board and then a chair of another major, I mean, that's part of the reason. Just it can become a little daunting to. I try to avoid being chair of other things while I'm the chair of my government's board.
I hear you.
So we have a motion on the table that had one. Are we talking about a second and adopting that, or asking Ed to remove this motion?
So
And
yeah, the first one will die for lack of a second.
got it.
So the new motion will be, Christine, can you present language for the revision of the bylaws? Then I'll do the election one. Did you say some or did I? If you're talking, you're muted.
My apologies. I'd say the motion would be to amend the bylaws to allow for a 1-year extension on the terms of chair and vice chair for the upcoming fiscal year.
So moved.
We're looking for a second.
Second,
Thank you.
second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All right. So,
And then I move that we elect Keith or appoint Keith Smith as chair for 1 additional year and myself as vice chair for 1 additional year.
Second.
okay, Christine, did you get the second?
It was Anthony.
Okay, Anthony. Thank you, Anthony. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right.
And then, Mr. Chair, if I could, I would say that to Greg's point about like the makeup of this executive committee, I think we're at a perfect time, knowing we've got 2 kind of foundational elements left, the budget and the strategic priority. But this is a great time for this body to start going, are we missing any voices or missing
Yeah.
any type of representation? I mean, part of it is definitely the moving around of the current squares we see on the screen, but it also may mean we might want to add or put somebody in that over the 2 years we think has been missing. So I think that's something that we can put on our list. I don't know, Christine, how exactly we get that work done, but that's probably something this board needs to do.
So along those lines, in my conversations with others over the course of time, I constantly hear, well, you're missing this group, or you're missing this person, or this voice in the conversation. I think originally when we set it up, we wanted to keep it small and tight, but I think it's now time to grow it. I'm pretty sure I read the bylaws, and whoever's looking at the bylaws, I think we can do this without amending the bylaws. I believe we have it written in the bylaws that we can grow, or we can add on to it as this body deems necessary. Is that correct?
Christine, it was my recollection that the original executive board had a definition of different roles that each of us, there was someone that was an elected official, there was someone
Right.
from the university, there was someone from the private sector, and so on. So
That is
we
correct.
are all filling specific roles defined somewhere, and it may not have been formal. If it is formal, then we need to look at that language if we're going to talk to change it by broadening it. Otherwise, we can start looking at one-to-one switching out. I could go to my other private sector board members and say, who wants to move up to the executive board this year. That's perhaps a little too random.
Can I ask you all if you feel like a change to this executive board needs to come in advance of, as a part of the strategic process, looking at the full partnership membership. So what I'm asking is, do you guys want to talk about changes that need to occur on the executive committee right now for fiscal year 22? Or do we want to be analyzing the full membership of the partnership and then from that membership determine what the seats on the executive board are and how those should turn over time?
That's right. That's how
my sense was, and that's why I was suggesting that somehow we move that this whole executive board extend for the same reasons that the two leadership roles extend, and that out of the strategic planning that would happen this coming year, we should look very closely at the board makeup and then the executive board makeup going forward from here. That's
How does
my
that
agree. I agree with that. It's the idea. My opinion is that this particular executive committee, we don't get too casual with just adding or subtracting whoever's here. So Christine, I think tying that to the strategic priority planning is perfect, because then you keep it tight, then it forces the cycling out of people. But it's more like let's analyze and see if there is a specific type of voice or sector that needs to be on the executive committee that's been missing from that full partnership. So I follow Greg's thinking on that.
And for us to maintain the current executive committee as it is does not require an action. The bylaws permit for it to maintain. It's only the chair and the vice chair that have term limits.
But I think when we have our full committee meeting, we need to explain this, why we're thinking this way. Great conversation. Thank you, Greg. I was thinking the same way, and I saw a bunch of heads nodding. So I think we're all in agreement with that. Is Stacy on the call? Okay, so I'm going to take a little chairman's prerogative and skip over the speaker series for two reasons. One, Stacy is here. Two, I'm really trying to get out the door by 2 o'clock for this wedding stuff I got to do. So we talked a little bit. We started talking about the strategic plan. So Christine, would you mind picking that conversation up and giving everybody an update on where we are on that process?
Yeah, absolutely. May 7th, so about a month ago, we issued an RFP to 4 different consulting firms to get proposals for a strategic planning process. Of those 4, one of them contacted us and declined because they had more work than they had staff for. One of them did not respond, and 2 of them submitted full proposals. We reviewed those proposals and we selected from those. I included that in this packet. I think the significantly stronger proposal came from the Spark Mill, which is who we worked with previously to do the strategic half-day session that we did in 2019. So we went ahead and issued to them that they were the selected consultant. And then we went ahead the next day and applied to the Virginia Housing Grant because we had to have all of their documentation in order to submit that. So Spark Mill is ready to go contingent upon receiving the award funding from the Virginia Housing Grant. So that is the next steps that we would be waiting to hear that award so that we can then issue an official notice to proceed.
Do we have a projected timeline on that notification?
We do not. It doesn't have a list. I mean, I can certainly reach out to my contacts over at Virginia Housing and say, when will this happen? But it's not something they've posted as to when they intend to give notice of award.
And will the grant likely be enough to cover all the costs?
The grant can only be used for direct costs for the consultant. And the consultant's proposal came in at $400 over the grant amount. So it's within a very reasonable amount that the PDC would be able to cover that difference. It would not cover any staff time related to organizing focus groups and getting the all of the community engagement stuff done, but it does cover all of our direct costs for the consultant.
Great.
So that kind of leads us into this budget conversation. Does anybody have any comments for Christine or thoughts on the strategic plan consultant?
I think we should thank Christine for taking the initiative and just making that happen, particularly with us not convening for a blessing. I really appreciate the showing initiative. Christine's very good at that, thank goodness. And so now we're all set to go as soon as we get the grant. Thank you.
Certainly, my pleasure.
wearing a couple hats at the same time too, to boot. Any other thoughts or comments on that before we go into the budget conversation? So we're all in agreement. If we end up receiving this grant, we're gonna pick up the tab on. We're gonna move pretty quickly with that, right, Christine?
Yes.
Did Spark Mill give you, if we pull the trigger, it's good to go? How much lead time do they need?
They're ready. He said they were sitting in the ready, and he actually reached out to me directly to say he is really excited to be
Good.
working with us on this next phase of our process. I think it's also important to note that the Spark Mill is listed as one of Virginia Housing's approved consultants for their Tier 2 grant. And so right now we applied for Tier 1, which is strategic planning. The Tier 2 grant is another $10,000 that can help with implementation. And they're on that approved consulting list. So they could potentially be a consultant that sees us through to the next phase as well.
Great news. Thank you so much. Echo what Greg and everybody's saying. Cheers and kudos to everybody on staff for making that happen. All righty, fun stuff, budget. So I do need to apologize to everybody for not to make an excuse, but I probably should have reached out to everybody beforehand before this went out. I did not. I had my brain wrapped around trying to get out of town for a couple of weeks for vacation. So I apologize. I did not reach out to everybody individually. That's on me. That being said, we, Ned and I spent a bunch of time working in staff, working on some kind of options. We have two basic budget scenarios in front of us and money funding scenarios in front of us. The first one is, as everybody remembers, the commission has dedicated $25,000 for this. There is a budget floating out there that is basically bare bones. It will not have any money included in it to do what we just talked about with the strategic plan. There will not have any staff time for it. It's just basically keeping the lights on, for lack of a better term. There is a budget in there that's been created that's somewhere in the $68,000, $73,000 or $75,000 number on that end of it. And Lucinda, Ned, and Christine and I kind of worked out a plan based on some conversations on what that revenue would look like from each organization. There was a late version sent out yesterday. I don't know if everybody had a chance to take a look at that. Lucinda, it might not be a bad idea to post it or put it on the screen share.
I'll put it on the screen. I don't think I sent the version out to the entire team.
Oh, okay, great. So I
No, we're going to
apologize.
pull it up live during the meeting.
Got it. Okay.
So this is the budget for like full funding, right? That one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But we did send something out for a previous meeting, correct? Got it.
Yeah.
So what
So this-
Lucinda's pulling up actually is revisions to the one that was sent out in the full packet.
So what we're trying to do is establish some sort of baseline of future boards, and I'm sure this will come up in the strategic planning, future planning on how we can raise the capital to keep this body doing what it's doing. So let me see what we got here. What are we looking at?
I'm trying to make it bigger.
Got it.
There we go.
And then I think, Lucinda, forgive me if I'm wrong, and I think it's the point now, and Keith, I think you just said this, but is then to bring it to this executive body to discuss, does this work? Does this make sense to everybody as the appropriate ask of all of the engaged stakeholders? And a little bit of dialogue here would help us. I know, I think where we landed in the last conversation, Ned and Keith and Lucinda, I feel like those local contributions, yes, she's about to revise it. Brilliant.
There you go.
There we go. And so that would put us whole at 75. So that puts the local jurisdictions contributing an additional 28,000 split by per capita formula, so that it's proportionate across the counties in the city. And again, that would be an additional ask to per capita funding that they're already contributing to the PDC. And then with UVA making this is proposing a 10,000 contribution. Nonprofit voting members that sit on the partnership, each making $1,000 contribution, and then private making a 2,000 contribution. So I mean, Keith, I don't want to steal your show, but I do think it requires a little bit of dialogue for us to say, do these look right? You know, certainly you can see the tabs across the bottom. We pulled a lot of different scenarios to see what made sense. And so we want some feedback from you all.
You're doing a better job than I'm doing. Well done. So, as you can tell, and as Christina just said, there's a bunch of back work that we've done on it. This is where we landed. You know, we have to physically go out and do the asks, right? We don't have to ask each individual organization to do this. We do have an obligation to try to get this wrapped up by the end of June. Just to put a little caveat to this, ultimately, much like Spark Mill's proposal, we need to have this discussion. It needs to go in front of the full body. Correct me if I'm wrong, Christine, on any of this. And then we're gonna have to bring it back to the commission. As long as we say we've got funding sources, I'm sure the commission will be okay with it. But there is a stepped process here. So we're starting with this conversation. So I'll shut up, and any individual that's representing an organization wants to jump in and make some comments, now would be a great opportunity to do that.
I'll jump in. I think, I don't know, this is probably difficult to figure out how to do, but it just feels like I feel conflicted, so I'm going to speak both sides of it. The 1,000 across the board for nonprofits, and maybe even for the private businesses too, I don't know, but feels like there could be some room to be a bit more responsive to the actual budgets of those organizations. So, because there is a large difference between some of these organizations, I think, in budgets, just from what I know about them, TJAC included. The other question too is like, I mean, TJAC, PHA, and Habitat, we're all part of, a partnership ourselves. TJAC itself is a partnership representing other organizations. We're kind of in a unique position, so I don't think we need to talk about anything especially unique to TJAC, but it just brings up kind of a question about membership. Also, like, should those organizations be called out in particular in perpetuity for membership on the RHP? I don't know. I think that's a question we should wrestle with in terms of our membership identity. But the other part of it, other question I have is, what does this provide? What does this provide for opinion into? Is it like a vote on the RHP? Is that kind of what this is, or is it purely support for operations of this program? I think that needs to be clarified before obviously we make this kind of ask of these different organizations. I think we just need to be really clear about what this is, what this helps us to accomplish, and what the responsibility of the entity paying into it then would be. So anyways, those are some of the thoughts. I don't have any answers, but those are my questions. Yeah.
Anybody want to tackle that?
I would just chime in. I think the same is true of the budgets of the 4 private people listed.
So let's break that question down a little bit for Anthony. So what I heard was, how do we come, Habitat is a larger organization. So what I'm hearing is maybe they can afford more than a small organization. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Okay. Similar to the percentage for the public entities, I'm assuming that's based upon population. Is that what that's referring to?
It is.
Maybe there could be something similar for all the entities. I don't know, whatever that metric is the equivalent of for nonprofits or for private businesses, but that could get very complicated. I get that, but it's something to think about.
So you've nailed the struggle that Ned and I had to T. How you know, it's easy with the public folks because
Yeah.
they're using the multiplier for the existing commission, right? So just also keep in mind, folks, these jurisdictions are already paying a substantial amount of money to the commission, right? So they're if somebody clicks on the jurisdictional contribution, thank you. So for instance, Ned's body's contributing 107,000 plus whatever that additional amount of money is that he needs to go back to his board to get to participate in this. And somewhat to other answer the question, Anthony, you know, part of why several executive committee meetings back, I was asking what our value proposition was, which was kind of what I was trying to answer. What is our value proposition? You just gave a wonderful presentation about this regional plan, which I frankly would never have happened, I think, without this regional housing partnership. Christine may disagree or agree with me on that. You know, the rental assistance program probably would not have happened if it hadn't. And there's a couple other positives that we did that would not have happened with this body. The question is how do we raise funds to support it, right? And this is something Ned and I have been struggling with, and this is kind of where we landed. This is not etched in stone, but those are great questions. Those are great questions. Those are great questions.
I think it's a great starting point for a proposal, and I totally respect that. I mean, it somewhat feels, I'll offer this too, and then I'll shut up. I realize I'm hogging it. It feels a little bit like maybe this is bringing a chicken and egg scenario because, and I know we need to raise funds for the next fiscal year now, so I'll couch that with that. But this does, I think, bring up an important question for the partnership about membership, because like I'm wondering, like, well, maybe there's actually a lot of nonprofits that would want to have membership on the RHP and would be willing to pay in more than just the 4 that are identified. And maybe that would, you know, maybe something a bit more, well, anyway, so I just offer that, right? And maybe there'd be more private companies too. So maybe we can work towards that through the strategic partnership or strategic planning process, but I think that might be an interesting thing for us to think about.
So Christine, that would be a great question for Spark Mill. Is this something they can help us navigate through? We're kind of really, at least from my perspective and my particular skill sets, you know, this is all new to me. You know, I don't know much. I'm part of a member organization, but it's very simple, right? That everybody pays a set fee, and to be a member of it. Maybe Spark Mill can help us through this. The reason I outlined how this process goes, we already have an existing budget. It's been approved by the commission. You know, we need to bring this back to the commission. So, you know, I don't want to punt this down the road too much further. I think we just talked about, you know, if next week we get a phone call from, and we get the money for the Spark Mill, if we don't have the capital, we don't have the money to put staff time to it. So we do need to kind of come up with a decision here and try to move this ball forward. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Does it need improvement? Sure as heck does. But I'm just trying to see what we can do to move forward so we can start getting some capital going in the right direction.
Can I ask a quick question, because I'm fairly new to all of this too. Are these all of the members of this organization, or are there other ones that are not represented here somehow?
Great question.
There are other members that are not represented, so we did not include the 2 citizen representatives as needing to pay in order to participate. And then there, I think, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but I think there was a discussion about the health district and the RTP member, the Regional Transit Partnership member, and one other not being contributing members. I can pull it up. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me. Should have had that ready.
Yeah, I would love to get to a situation where every member pays to play. That's ultimately where I want to get to. It's just how we get there. is way outside my skill sets.
I think it's totally reasonable to expect different kinds of members to pay different kinds of dues for, partnership. I mean, to be part of this. And, I have a lot of experience with member organizations. So, I mean, I'm happy to give you my opinion, but I won't burden everybody. I know.
Well, and I think that
Out of
is
here in 2
something.
minutes.
No, I think, Margaret, I think that's really helpful. I think it is something that we should continue to explore is having almost that, voting member, contributing member, associate member, and inviting more people to be engaged and a part of the housing partnership through that membership. I just don't know that we would have that set up and ready in order to be able to get going into this next fiscal year. And I think that's where the real crux is knowing. And I think a lot of you all know this, but I think it's important to share that because I've had several conversations with folks lately that I don't think folks realize that the Planning District Commission works as a billable hours agency. So we almost operate as if we were a consulting firm. And so each hour that's expended, each hour that a staff member works on a specific project or program needs to be billed to a specific revenue source. So it would be much easier if we could say, hey, we've got half of an FTE, we can have them do whatever they can possibly do in 40 hours time. But unless we have a revenue source to cover that FTE, we don't have time billed for that person to be able to work on a program. And so at the $25,000 budget that we have right now, I mean, you guys know how quickly $25,000 goes when it's at a billable rate. It would not allow us to do a lot of the things that I think we really think are important for the partnership to accomplish in the next year. So we kind of had to have a stopgap measure for this upcoming fiscal year, knowing that we need to look at our membership. We need to look at whether it's going to be like a dues membership organization. I think that all should be considered in this upcoming year.
Thank you for clarifying that, Christine.
So a quick observation, there are 15 entities identified here and we have 21 board members.
So that would be, did I mute again? Sorry. The TJPDC person is not contributing because of the 25,000. So that's one of them. 2 citizen representatives, Workforce Investment Board, Regional Transit Partnership, and the Health Department were the remaining 6.
I don't want to get too out of line with where people are thinking about this, but if the localities feel like this is a worthwhile endeavor, can we up their contribution and reduce the contribution of the nonprofits potentially? I hate to see even small amounts of money being taken from providers in order for them to participate in a process. And, I think we probably do need more voices from all sectors involved in this. And so the sort of pay to play thing, I'm not sure is the best thing, though folks should have a responsibility if they want to participate to contribute in some way. So I don't know how you ensure that and lock it in for a budget, but would upping the contribution from localities make sense?
So Brandon, I'm going to jump into that because I think Ned jumped off the line. So I'm going to speak for him and the localities a little bit so that their budget process is already done. So he needs to go back to his board for an additional $11,000 into that. We've also heard from the city of Charlottesville that they're tapped out, so we've got to go fight for this money that we've got allocated in here just for that amount of money to come up. I mean, we could try to increase that a little bit. And, if we increase one sector of it, we can decrease another sector of it. But, this is a heavy lift all the way across the board. Real quickly, Christine, refresh my memory. Is there some grant sources that we're potentially seeking to help with this?
Yeah, the only other one other than the Virginia Housing grant, which is a direct pass through to the consultant, is we applied for a BAMA Works grant in order to continue to do the educational series into the fall. And that full 10,000, if we were to be awarded that, that full 10,000 could go towards staff time, but it would have to be specifically related to putting on that webinar, that educational series. But yes, that could take this down another 10,000 if we are awarded that.
Which means then we can determine where we adjust to what member. Correct? We have to come across some fair and equitable way to do that across the board. You know, this money stuff is never a great conversation, guys. But we do need to try to move this forward. None of this is going to happen that we're going to walk into somebody and say we need a check today. But at some point, we've got to move money into it. Otherwise, this body just ceases to exist, because we're not going to be able to do much with a $25,000 budget or revenue coming in.
You know, speaking for TJAC as the director, but not from the board, obviously, you know, I would be happy. I think it's a worthwhile investment in the RHP for this coming year. And what, you know, as a potential paying support member, I think we can do both. Try to address the need for this coming year, knowing that we're going to go through strategic planning process. I think maybe, you know, anyways, I just putting it out there. I am happy to support that, knowing that a new structure hopefully could be devised to kind of better suit the ongoing, you know, needs for this body. But I think for whatever it's worth, that's where I land on it. I'd be happy to continue supporting it at this juncture as it's laid out, with the knowledge that there is an intent to really dig into this and set up a more sustainable plan.
That's the goal, Anthony. So thank you.
I would agree with that myself. I think of it as kind of like a foundational support, you know, to build the organization, and just hope that, you know, that there would be some kind of structure that makes more sense, that can be worked into our budgets on an ongoing basis out of the strategic plan.
I'd like to reiterate that I think that the partnership is well worthwhile, and we need to find a way to make this option happen. And the details, you know, can be worked out.
Colette, you would like to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Anthony in his point. The university is prepared to, you know, contribute the $10,000 reflected here, but I mean, I would like to see, you know, after going through the strategic planning process in the coming year, $75,000 may not be the right budget, right? It might be a lot more than that. So we're going to have to wrestle the longer term funding of the organization. So I would, like Anthony, I would look at this as a 1 year kind of budget, figure out how we can meet the needs that we see for the next year. But then during the coming year, really think through, you know, membership, who should contribute what, you know, what do we need in terms of resources, and, you know, how do we sell that to potential investors, really? So, I mean, that's where I would land. So I'm comfortable with what we have here, but think that we have a lot of work to do in the coming year.
Thank you, Colette, and thank you for the UVA stepping up to 10,000. It kind of brings a different question, because this kind of heavy lifting, you know, we've got to probably start considering getting back to in-person meetings. I don't know how everybody feels about this, but this kind of topic can't be done with the Hollywood Square style. We need to be sitting across the table and really and hammering this out. So my hope is, you know, we can get back quickly. I do need to ask a quick question on the $75,000 budget, Christine. So let's assume we get the grant. Do we have the hours baked into the 75,000 budget to handle this, or do we need additional money from a staff's perspective? Does that make sense?
Say that again. Let me just
Okay.
make sure I understand.
So we built a budget, right, on $75,000. We now get this grant that's going to require X amount of staff hours. Do we have that covered in the 75,000, or do we need to grow that $75,000 budget?
That was budgeted within that 75. We had a line item for strategic plan review for
Perfect,
staff
perfect.
time.
Thank you. Okay. Well, do we have to take any formal action on this, Christine, or it just seems like we have a consensus and we move it forward to the full body?
I think if this body feels that this is a good starting place for next year, then it would go before the full partnership for a vote.
Cool.
Can I actually, this is not on the agenda, and I apologize that I'm bringing this up without it being on the agenda, but in reference to your going back to meeting in person, once the governor, if the governor does not extend the state of emergency, as a public body, we will be required to meet in person. What we are able to do is adopt a policy as a body. So as the regional housing partnership with its own distinct bylaws, we would be able to adopt a policy that allows for remote electronic participation into our meetings. However, the code in Virginia states that can't be for more than 25% of the in-person meetings, and it has to be for an extenuating circumstance. So for example, travel, illness, care of a family member, there are specific things written into the code that will allow somebody to participate electronically. What that would require is the person to reach out to the chair in advance to ask to participate electronically. And then at the beginning of an in-person meeting, there would have to be a vote of the partnership to allow for that electronic participation due to that extenuating circumstance. So I would ask permission of you all, and I'm sorry I didn't put the draft in front of you, but we just did it at the commission meeting this month. I would ask of you all to allow me to prepare a memo for the full partnership as well as a draft policy, so that the full partnership is looking at adopting a policy to allow for that electronic participation moving forward, knowing that that can't be instead, you can't just do it just because you don't feel like making the drive. It would have to be for one of the reasons listed within the state code.
So I think a logical track would be, since the commission adopted it, it ultimately needs to be adopted by us at the same language. Okay.
Well,
Thank
we
you.
would have to have the policy in place. Otherwise, we can't permit remote participation. So if that works for you all, I'll just bring it to the full partnership at the June meeting in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Hasn't the governor already declared that that June 30th he's lifting it?
Yeah, like he's not extending.
That's correct. He's publicly stated that he'll let the emergency authorization lapse. Mhm.
So that would mean our June executive committee meeting would be in person.
Okay.
Or July, did I say
July.
June? Excuse me. July executive committee meeting would be in person at PDC.
Right. So folks, I'm going to try to move this along a little bit. My lovely bride just walked in the office, and I'm going to have to move on here pretty quickly. The next on the agenda was a legislative update. Looks like Ned is with us. You want to kind of touch base on that a little bit?
Quick overview. I mean, this was just my brainstorm from the last time that I would, bring it up for discussion. How the localities do it is they actually, have scheduled time where they meet with the legislators, they go over a full packet, and then they put forward, the jurisdictional priorities. And then, you try to get the legislators to support it, introduce bills, all that. I don't see that as necessarily the format that this body could get into. I was trying to think outside of the box a little bit more creatively, that this body could be attacking it a little bit more from an advocacy standpoint. We all do our own individual advocacy, of course, to these legislators on a number of occasions. So I thought it could be interesting if this body may, especially being an election year, that they could, we could maybe host a forum of some sort where you bring them forward with, maybe we could create position statements and ahead of that a forum, and then get legislators together that represent the region and speak to them specifically about issues that are important to this body. And then it could potentially tie in a second time of the year to our annual annual partnership meeting that we put on hold. So you have a fall forum that's tied, election years every year in Virginia. So you could tie it into the ones that are critical to that particular year. bring them forward versus us saying, hey, can you put these bills forward? We can talk to them about topics, hear their responses. And then maybe that then drives, like I said, advocacy type of things from this body, and then bring them back in the spring when we do our annual meeting and see what happened when they were at session. Where were you at on the things that you talked about this past fall? So that's as far as I got in kind of the brainstorm of it after moving on from, well, let's bring them in here and meet with our body. I think with our schedules, their schedules, and knowing how hard it is just to get them to meet with the local governments, that could just be another, and I don't know if that's even the most productive way to use all of our time. So I'm throwing that out there for consideration, and perhaps we can bring it back on another agenda, give some people some time to think about it. And if that's the case, then we can maybe move it forward and see what comes of it.
Thank you, Ned. Any thoughts or comments for Ned at this point? So guys, if
Sounds
you
like a
would be,
good plan to me.
thank you, Anthony. If it's okay with everybody, can we just skip past the round table so I could get out the door and celebrate, go visit my family and get the whole wedding thing and, okay, write more checks and move on. Ned, anytime you want to send extra cash my way, I'll give you my account.
Yeah, nobody made any comments about upping the budget amounts for the.
So,
Just wanted to,
so everybody's good with us skipping over the roundtable, right? Cool. So we have a second public comment period now. So I don't know if there's any other public on it, but this is your opportunity. If there's any public, would you like to speak? Any public? No public. Well, then I'm going to adjourn 15 minutes early. Thank you. It was a great discussion. We tackled a lot in this meeting, so thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody Smiley's face in person next the end of this month or whenever our next meeting is. And I'm assuming Christine will send everything out, and the when, the where, and the why, and all that fun stuff. So, guys, I got to bail. Thank you for everything, and we'll see each other to the end of the month.
Enjoy
I just
your
want to
family
say
and the
Happy
wedding.
thank you to Ned
Bye-bye,
and
everyone.
Keith for your leadership.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, buddy.
And thanks for being able to do one more year.
Well,
Awesome.
Mrs. Smith is sitting right there, so I have to start behaving. So see you guys later.
Thank you, Yona.
She heard that.